Greetings and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Karl's Spirit Month. This week, on episode 27, for episode 27, we're doing another standard bourbon. And this is one that you would typically find on any restaurant or bar or back bar across the nation. And that is none other than Maker's Mark. Maker's Mark, of course, is very well known across the country. I know several of you, it's one of your favorite drinks. But Maker's Mark was originally created by Bill Samuels back in 1958. He created this bourbon with a friend of his that gave him advice on a recipe, gave him advice on yeast, what to use, and so forth. And that good friend was none other than Pappy Van Winkle. Bill Samuels, though, created his own brand of this, and Maker's Mark is the result. It is a wheated whiskey, just like Pappy, and it is produced in Laredo, Kentucky, under the ownership of Beam Suntory. It was marketed in the 60s and 70s, just as bourbon began to sort of decline. Their marketing tagline was, "It tastes expensive," and it is. It was supposed to be a premium bourbon of the time. Makers withstood the decline of bourbon throughout the 80s and 90s and became a bar favorite. And the rest is kind of history. Chances are you've gone to a restaurant and you've ordered a bourbon. You're probably served one of three drinks. Jim Beam White, very good chance. Wild Turkey, good chance. Or Maker's Mark, very good chance. With Maker's Mark being obviously the more upscale of those three drinks. Maker's is a small batch, meaning that it has a small number of barrels in each dump that produces a product. Maker's claims that they only use less than 19 barrels in each batch. Maker's is also one of the few distilleries that rotates its stock, meaning they take barrels from the top floor, move it to the middle, and then to the bottom as the years progress. And by doing so, those bottom barrels, they stay there, that they go back to the top. What this is supposed to do during the aging process is expose them to all the variances of temperature and humidity in the rickhouse. And so what this is supposed to do, according to Maker's Mark, is make this a more consistent bourbon. And I think we can obviously say this is one of the strong suits of Maker's. They produce a consistent, good bourbon every time. The other big memorable thing about Maker's Mark, of course, is the red wax that drips down the throat of the bottle. Obviously, this is their trademark, and actually, it is a registered trademark. If you're in the bourbon business and you try to have red wax that comes dripping down the side of your glass, Makers will sue you, and they have sued other producers. Today, each bottle is still hand dipped, just as it was in 1958. 125 bottles a minute come off the assembly line with that red wax. And the other cool thing about the red wax is that it was introduced by Bill Samuel Sr.'s wife, Margie. Margie came up with the red wax dripping down the bottle, and she was inducted into the Bourbon Hall of Fame as a result in 2014. So cheers to Margie. Well done. A little bit about Maker's Mark, just the standard expression. In the glass, we're looking at 70% corn. We're looking at 16% wheat. Remember, this is a wheated bourbon. And 14% malted barley. It is bottled at 90 proof. There was a big argument about 7-8 years ago about making this an 84 proof or an 86 proof expression, and people rose up and spoke out. And Beam Suntory, who currently owns Makers, said, "Okay, look, we'll stop. We'll leave it at 90 proof." And so 90 proof is what it has been for a while. There is no age statement, although Makers claims that most of the juice in each bottle is about 6 years old. So in the glass, we've got a nice little light copper color. It's not as light as that wheat-colored expression we had the other night. It's not as dark as some others and have that deep, rich tones. It's just a nice, pleasant-looking light coppery color. On the nose, a couple of things. Actually, two things right off the front: sweetness and ethanol. And so I'm going to start with the ethanol first. It's for a 90 proofer. This has a lot of alcohol smell to it. It's kind of surprising from a 90 proof. I think after you let this set a little bit, that alcohol wafts off, and you get a much better feel for what's in the glass. That sweetness, we're getting the typical vanillas and caramels that we get in most bourbons, but there's some nice warm brown sugar notes here too. And I don't know how to quite describe it, but light summer fruit. Does that make any sense? It's not a dark fruit; it's light. Maybe a peach or a strawberry or something like that. It's something really light. It's not citrusy. It's just a light fruity smell. That's some of that sweetness that I'm picking up. Okay, let's go ahead and have a taste of Maker's Mark here. It's a solid bourbon. That vanilla hits me right off the front. For smelling that much alcohol, I don't have a lot of alcohol taste. So that's a huge plus. I like a little burn, but I don't like a lot of alcohol burn. I'd rather have the taste of the bourbon. Makers delivers that. I'm getting a medium mouthfeel. There's just enough you can start to chew on. So it's not too thin, but it's not some of the thicker, more viscous liquids we've had in the past. It's smooth. I'm getting a little butterscotch in there, and some more of those light fruits. Maybe that's a strawberry. I'm not real sure. It's not in your face strawberry shortcake, but it's just a very light white fruit smell or taste in this case. As far as the finish, it's mild, not particularly long. There's a little bit of that alcohol right on the tip of the tongue, a little bit of burn. That quickly goes away. A little spice on the back edges of the tongue, but the wheat really rounds off the edges of this drink. It makes this a very smooth pour. There's a little bit of burn here in the throat. I don't get a whole huge warm feeling in the chest, but it's in the throat. It feels nice. It's just a really nice finish bourbon. It's not particularly long, but it's just nice. So my takeaway. Makers, obviously, it's a deservedly a great standard in the bourbon world. It's one of the first bourbons that I ever tried. It's got some great sentimentality to it, I think. Personally, I like Maker's 46 for its complexity and deeper flavors, but regular Maker's is just a great bourbon for anyone who's interested in bourbon. It's a great way to get started. It's a great sipper for anyone who's been around. It's a small batch, but I think the other big key here is its consistency. It just makes it a valuable addition to your bar. You always know what you're going to get when you pour a glass of Makers. You know what to expect. And there's a lot of comfort in that. So, Makers, rightfully one of the best-selling whiskeys in the U.S. And by the way, that's a whiskey with just a Y, not an E. It has classic notes of bourbon, but it has smoothness because of that wheated profile. It's got a very softer mouth feel. Sorry, Karl. It's just a good solid bourbon. And it just doesn't sit up and wow me, but it's a good solid bourbon. It's got great flavor. It's just not really deep. So, because of its solidness and just the way that it handles itself and its consistency, on the Karl scale, the Maker's Mark is going to get a 4.25. That's 4.25 stars. So that's Maker's Mark, ladies and gentlemen. I hope everybody enjoyed. As always, I want everyone to stay safe, peace, and happy pours.